Writing Matters with Dr. Troy Hicks is a Writable podcast. Find more episodes and subscribe on your favorite platforms. And if you want to learn how to grow great writers, check out writable.com.
In this episode of Writing Matters, I speak with my friend and colleague through NCTE and the Educator Collaborative, Heather Rocco. Heather is a supervisor of over 100 English Language Arts teachers across 6 schools, and she shares her insights about the teaching of writing, developing professional learning experiences, and her passion project, Understanding Introverted Students. Welcome to Writing Matters. Today, we speak with a friend and colleague, Heather Rocco, who I've known through NCTE and our collaboration through Christopher Lehman's Educator Collaborative. Heather is an award-winning English teacher and is now teaching other teachers through her professional development work. Really looking forward to the conversation today. Welcome.
Thank you, Troy. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about your path through education. How is it that you have come to be where you are today, being a teacher of over 100 plus teachers across 6 different school buildings in your district?
Sure. So I always loved writing. I moved around a lot as a kid, and writing was always my outlet to do that. So it felt, as I got into college, it felt important to me to be a writer. So I started off as a journalism major and then switched to a teaching or education major because of a positive experience I had teaching an English class, and a professor who said, "Have you ever thought about teaching writing?" And it kind of like struck me as, oh. Fast forward my journey, I became a high school English teacher, started on Long Island, then I moved to New Jersey, and fell into leadership because someone believed in me when I did not believe in myself, and said, "Why don't you get your certificate and become a supervisor?" And so I did. And so I led a 9 to 12 department at Westfield High School for many, many years. And then I switched to Chathams School District, which is where I am now, located in Chatham, New Jersey. And I began there as a 7 to 12 teacher supervisor, where I also had a class and taught. And then they transitioned my role into a K to 12 ELA supervisor. So that's what I am currently doing now, supporting ELA teachers in their classroom as they're implementing, of course, reading and writing instruction.
That's fantastic. So you mentioned this idea that you fell into leadership. I wonder if you might be willing to tell us just a little bit more about that nudge that you got from that mentor that
Sure.
helped lead you into your master's program and into this role as a supervisor.
I'd be delighted. So my mentor's name is Paula Roy, and I still reach out to her often and thank her because she believed in me as a teacher, as well as a writer, as well as I was still in my late 20s when this happened to me, as someone who had potential. And she was really interested in empowering female leadership. And so her belief in me helped me believe myself. And so I got the certification, and there was the opening in my district, which we knew was coming. And she was the nudge who said, "Yes, you can do this. What's the worst that can happen? So they don't hire you. So what?" And I thought, okay. And now I'm in my 15th year in some kind of supervisory capacity. And I say all the time to Paula that it's because she said, "Sure, you can. Try it." So it's amazing what that little nudge can do.
That is amazing. And I think that 15-year mark probably coincides a little bit with your work on the Conference on English Leadership, which is one of the subgroups of NCTE. Is there a correlation there in some way?
There is a correlation there. So my former supervisor in Westfield had been a member of CEL. She retired, and she said, when I then got the position, she said, "Well, then you have to go to the Conference on English Leadership. That's the only way that I've survived my career." And I thought, okay, sure, I'll go. I did not know anyone. And over the year, I just kept coming back because it served all of my needs. And there were these folks there who were doing the same thing that I was trying to do. Sometimes in your leadership role, you're the only ELA supervisor in your district or in your region even, and it can be kind of a lonely place. So the opportunity to connect with people at CEL just really helped me both kind of shape who I was as a leader and then make connections to help continue my path as to how I could grow as a leader, as my positions continued to change too. I just needed that network over and over again. So it's been great for me.
Absolutely. Well, and certainly as others who are aspiring into leadership in literacy and English studies in particular, and department chairs and curriculum coordinators, it's an organization that can help support them too. So it's always worth giving a shout out.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, you mentioned that, sometimes it can be a little lonely. However, I guess that it's probably never dull. And I know that it's probably difficult to describe any particular day, let alone any particular week or any particular month in your job. But could you give us just a sense? What happens for you as a leader of other teachers when you're out visiting classrooms and you're helping with individual coaching or preparing to do professional learning? What does your job look like and feel like over the span of, say, an average week? What might we expect to see you doing?
Because I was thinking, well, let's talk about what I did today. Well,
you could do that too.
So a typical day involves a lot of meetings with teachers. So in my 6 to 12 group, it's structured so that I can have individual meeting with teachers. I work with teachers during their first few years of their career. I meet with them every 2 weeks, and we talk about plans. We talk about assessing students. We talk about writing emails. We talk about creating assessments, all those types of things. So like today I met and had 2 of those. And it's just, I say often that the traction and the growth that we've been able to make as a department is because of all of these great ideas that my teachers come to the meetings with, or that we bat around with that idea of like, what if I tried? What if I did? And because we're always engaged in conversation, it just creates this kind of, I hope at least, they feel supported to take risks and try things. So lesson planning, we call them lesson planning meetings for lack of a better term, but they're really just conversations around teaching. So that happens almost daily. I have at least 1 or 2 of those. I also, a few years ago with my special education colleague, Kim Lanza, we don't have instructional coaches in my district. So we took that on ourselves to make a practice of that, so that not only are we supporting teachers by, yes, I go in and I do the observation and the formal evaluation, but I want them to know that there are opportunities where I can stand beside them or sit next to them on the floor like I did today. So I worked in a 4th grade classroom today and worked with students to help a teacher who had reached out to me who was looking for support in how to confer with with students about their reading, because she was struggling. She feels like she's settled with writing, but she really needs some work with reading. And so I got to spend an hour in her classroom working with kids. Those are my favorite days, when I get to do things like that. Of course, I do the formal observation and evaluation process, but then I also spend a lot of time thinking about professional development and supporting teachers and designing, whether it's our meeting time or our professional development time, that feels meaningful and useful to them. So that is another opportunity and where I kind of dedicate my work. And of course, curriculum. We're revising curriculum right now, all of those things. So.
Right. Well, I'd really like to come back and pick up on what this professional learning looks like. And I find it very interesting that you do everything from emails to assessment with your teachers.
Yes, and what do you need today?
And everything in between.
That's right.
But yeah, tell us a little bit more. So as you're talking with teachers, and as you said, standing or sitting beside them and helping them and their students in their classrooms, what are some of the current trends, topics, inquiries around the teaching of writing? And then I'm sure that'll lead into this professional learning piece. But as you think about 2 or 3 of the big issues or inquiries that your teachers bring when they say, I'm struggling with teaching writing and teaching, what's the end of that sentence? What's currently happening for you as you work with teachers?
So a few things. One that quickly comes to mind is we were having struggles. We've been 1-to-1 in terms of digital technology for a few years. When the 1-to-1, when the Chromebooks came in, teachers felt pressure to use them all the time, every day, every lesson, kids, encouraging kids to take notes on it, etc. But what we found was just as an adult, I have 72 tabs open at any given time. Kids also were having 72 tabs open at any given time. And so it was actually having a negative impact on the writing. So we had lots of discussion and went and returned, not wholly, but had conversations about where does, I love my notebook. Like, where does the notebook play a role in the classroom? And how can we balance, when do we invite kids to use a notebook versus when do we invite kids into the digital space? And some of that, they have to increase their own awareness as to what works best for them. So, we're still kind of seeking that balance, but there's a lot more notebook use now. And that was just helpful for my teachers to help their students kind of stay on task and not get sucked into the digital vortex. However, we're using, of course, now we're doing so much more, and teachers are still looking for, and this will transition into trend number 2 here, but for ways to use the digital world to do all different types of writing and interact with other audiences that are outside of our school, or even just exposing their own writing to their classmates. So we, of course, are playing around with blogs, et cetera, but doing podcasts now, doing book trailers on YouTube is a way that we've just been looking for other ways to invite that different formats, what feels authentic, into our classrooms. One thing we've been talking about quite a bit, and we've been working on for many years. When I first came to my school district now, there was a lot of writing in response to the reading, and it always felt like whatever writing students were doing had to be born from or based on because they read insert book title here. And it was still very much a literature-based classroom. Now we've spent a lot of time talking about what other types of writing do students want to do, are interested in doing? How can we engage them in that work that feels perhaps more authentic? And we spent more time looking at what is being published across the world now. What, if we're going to write about reading, what other ways are people writing about what they're reading? Sometimes book reviews, yes. We use, one of my teachers, Shannon Faulkner, recommended LitHub as a great digest where they go out and they pull all these different articles where people are talking about books and literature. We've been using those as mentor texts. So that's one piece of it. But the second piece of it really is we're interested in the opportunities to look at expository writing. We feel as though we've kind of moved away from the idea that writing is thinking, that Peter Elbow, talks about, and it's, stay in the lane. We're doing argumentative writing. We're doing explanatory writing. We're doing narrative writing. Well, those cross over. And sometimes it should be the opportunity for students to just expose how they're thinking about an idea, or to follow kind of a nugget or a thread, or, to focus on something that interests them, but they don't necessarily have an argument about it. There's, of course, room for argumentative writing, but it doesn't always have to be framed under a thesis, et cetera. So that's kind of where I am right now. What are more ways that we can show students that writing is a tool to help them think and understand their thinking, as well as then seek connection with other people who do or do not think, or at least have those interests as they do. So those are some of the things that I'm interested in at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, picking up on that last point, and of course the root word is going to escape me right now because we're recording this podcast, but I know that, essay from the French is something about to discover or to explore. And I really appreciate what you just said there, that sometimes we get so caught up in teaching the thesis-driven essay, whether it's the 5-paragraph format or something that's more progressive, we still get very caught up in a thesis-driven essay, and we don't necessarily allow students those opportunities just to explore. How do I know what I think until I see what I say? And, I don't know who to attribute that to either, but there's that mantra that we want students to have opportunity to just play with ideas. And I'm glad to hear that you're doing that with your teachers. So let's talk a little bit more about that work then. So as you are designing professional learning for other educators, what are some of the models that you're using? What are some of the ways that you invite them into their own inquiry and professional learning?
Yeah. So a few years ago, in my department, ELA department, we we're inspired by this 80-20 or Genius Hour approach that's been taken by a lot of businesses. We actually had a field trip to Google, which is where this was born, in terms of a nugget of an idea. And of course, we're doing that. I see schools doing that with their students all the time as well. And so I know for several years I've been working on differentiated instruction for professional development. And yet it was still born out of, while I would get their input, it would still be like, okay, which of these 3 things are you interested in? And they would pick one of those 3 things. Instead, I wanted to open it up broader. Every year, our teachers in New Jersey set a professional goal for themselves. And it often felt a little bit contrived. Sometimes it was a goal recommended by the district, like this year we're doing initiative here. And that would be their professional goal. Just like kids, adults don't necessarily respond all that well to it either. And so they go through the motions and attend the PD sessions, but it's not an authentic experience for them. So instead, I asked teachers to set goals like, what are you most interested in? I framed the original question around, what is the one thing you would do or study or research or implement in your class if you had the time to do it? If you had, another 5 to 10 hours of professional time, yes, I would dedicate my time to do this. And so that's where we started, and teachers set those goals. And then we created a PD structure. I let go of a little department meeting time and would give them, an hour or so on a Monday where we would typically be in a meeting or in a PD training session designed by me, and said, go. You can work independently, you can collaborate. And that's how we proceeded throughout the first couple years. Actually, we were doing it at the end of the year. We would have what we called the Genius Hour celebration, where everyone would come together. I'd have 1 or 2 volunteers present to the whole group, but then we'd break off in small groups and everyone would share what they studied that year, how it impacted their classroom. And it was an opportunity to build community as well as expertise. Because if you're setting a goal that everyone has the same goal, then you all also have the same expertise. But if we're allowed to set individual goals, then we diversify our interests and then our levels of expertise. So if you're working, I often use the example, one of my teachers, Tony, had spent a year reading all types of books on ADHD students because he was working with a population that was challenging him, and he was trying to find ways to better engage them. So then Tony became the expertise, so teachers were going to him to ask questions when they had similar students. So it actually built our capacity as a community of educators because everyone had different interests, and then we shared them. Now, we've expanded that, so it's a broader district initiative, and we have a few options. The Genius Hour, as I just described it, is still one of the options. And then we also offer what we're calling learning labs. So it's optional. You can opt in or not. It's like courses where you can take a course that runs over 2 sessions, 4 sessions, whatever. And there's all different types of it. There's a traditional kind of led by a supervisor type of course. I'm thinking like my special ed supervisor colleague is doing one on executive functioning, whereas I'm doing one where it's a book study. So we chose based on input from teachers, we chose John Warner's book, Why They Can't Write. And we're reading that now together. So I have about, I don't know, maybe it's like 10 of us in the group. We actually just met yesterday afternoon. And everyone's bringing their discussion questions. This is the passage that really challenged me. And we're having those types of conversations around writing, which then for many of them is inspiring their independent or their collaborative work that they're doing on their own. The impact or the ripple effect of this, of course, is then teachers raising their own awareness as to how important it is to give student choice in their classroom, allowing them to pursue their own areas of interest, as well as then just to kind of fall into that sometimes uncomfortable experience of being a learner when you feel a little lost, or maybe you run into a dead end, or you're not you don't know which resource is best to use, which has, I think, built a sense of empathy too with my teachers. I mean, my teachers are amazing. I'm the most blessed supervisor in the entire world. But they're always, always expanding, always looking to learn, and what they're bringing into the classroom because of these experiences has really been phenomenal.
That is amazing. And I certainly respect and appreciate that you allow teachers the time and the space and what they bring to the table. And my guess is that even though there may still be one or two who are not quite on board, it sounds like the vast majority are, and that over the past few years, you've been able to build up those expectations, that we trust you, we value you, we appreciate what you bring, and we want you to have the time that you need as well. And I think that's hard for us to let go and to it's hard in our own classrooms, let alone across the whole district to let people. But as you said, it comes back to that core piece that if we want to emulate what they should be doing in their own classrooms, then we have to walk the walk. So
Exactly.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and to that point, there's always going to be those one or two students, and there's always going to be those one or two educators. I just can't make decisions around the one or two. We try and make decisions around the ones who will build the energy. And I think it's more likely that those stragglers or late adopters would come on board if I have, 98 teachers who are all in and doing the work. So, and we support them along the way. I mean, part of those lesson planning meetings that I referred to earlier, I'm talking about, how's your Genius Hour work going? What are you doing? Can I provide a resource for you? So they're never just on their own. They don't pick a goal in September and we talk about it again in May. So we talk about it all year long.
Wow, great. Well, and I know from some of your previous work with the Ed Collab, and I think the fact that we might share this personality trait, though people might question whether this is true or not, given how much we're out and about. I know one of your passion projects is helping students who may be more introverted. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the role of introversion and how that affects student writers and some of the things you've been thinking about and pondering related to that over the last few years.
Sure. So my story is I've always been a quieter kid. As I mentioned earlier, I moved around a lot. So I just thought it was like a personality trait. I just was a little bit less confident socially. When I read Susan Cain's book, Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, I read it in like 2013, I think I read it. It blew my mind because it showed me that it's more than just being quiet. I have a need to be quiet. Introverts, it's about the energy source. So an extrovert, it gets energy by being around people, by talking. They're the ones that like to get together and brainstorm. They're the people who talk on the phone, on their car ride home. I'm not that person. Introverts get re-energized by time spent alone. We like to work in the quiet. We need time to think and process, come down from our day. And in the classroom, classrooms are noisy places and schools are noisy places, and the bells ring every 56 minutes or 80 minutes. There's always then, loud noise in the hallways, as well as our classrooms are very collaborative now, rightfully so. I don't like kids sitting in rows and listening to a teacher lecture. I think we moved well away from that many years ago and, of course, pushed into small groups. However, we have to be respectful of the introverted student who does need, not just want, but actually needs time to think on their own first, perhaps develop some ideas, to just prepare for some type of collaboration. That's not to say they can't do it, because they absolutely can. But that time with a notebook that maybe they can jot down a few things, bullet point, dash off a couple of ideas, is really valuable and critical to them. The other thing that I know, when we brought in an LMS system, we use Schoology in my district, but whether it's Google Classroom, whatever, I remember that first year, teachers saying to me, I cannot believe how much this student writes in response to, a question that I pose, because he's able to write it on, in writing on this message board. But he never says anything in class. Why is that? Oh my gosh, I have to talk to him. And I have to explain that's because the student has some time to think about it, feels more comfortable in the written form than in the oral form. I know that's often how I feel. I can put together my thoughts more clearly in a more concise way if I have the opportunity to write them down and process it. Sometimes when I'm going off the top of my head, I just can't think it through the way that I want to. So I think giving all students, but introverted students in particular, that quiet time to really think and process, and then say, all right, turn in and talk with your neighbor, is being respectful. It's not to say that introverts always have to work alone, because we don't want to always work alone, but we do need the time to kind of have that quiet. And I know we have an independent reading program, and all of our students read 6 to 12, at least 10 minutes at the beginning of ELA every day. And one introverted student, I know this child is introverted, in a survey that we did say, it's the only quiet 10 minutes I have all day long, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. So just being mindful of that can help make a better place for our introverted students.
Mm-hmm. Well, even one strategy you just mentioned in there is that moment of, okay, before the turn and talk or the group work, let's all just write. Take 30 seconds, a minute and a half, jot your thoughts down. That's just a good collaborative strategy anyway for everyone, right? So we know what we're thinking and we get ready to go into that conversation being prepared and thoughtful, and to know that it also is supporting introverted students in that way is helpful too. So yep, I can definitely understand what you said about reading the Susan Cain book, and I'm right with you on that one.
I know you are, Troy.
I totally feel that. Totally feel it. So as we come to the close of our time here today, and knowing, of course, our conversations will continue elsewhere, but for our listeners today, I'm really curious about the role of writing in your own professional life. I know you've had some ebbs and flows and some ups and downs as a teacher writer. And I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about the role of writing in your professional life.
Sure. Well, I love writing. It was my first love. When I was little, I would write poems as gifts. I have continued to do that to this day. But I have struggled as a writer too, which, as I read more, I've spent a lot of time reading writers talk about their writing, right? Does that make sense? Yes. And have read and appreciated when they share their struggles. I know for me, a couple years ago, I kind of had a really negative writing experience, and it set me back in a way that frustrated me. And I couldn't crawl out of it because I felt it kind of stabbed my confidence a little bit, made me question if I had a voice or anything to contribute to the profession. And that's where I've truly appreciated the nudge from Chris Lehman, who we mentioned before, from the Educator Collaborative, who encourages us to write for the Ed Collab blog. And he's always so encouraging when I send one of those blogs his way, and makes me feel, like, yes, you do have a voice. And then this conversation about introversion, which I've been having for the last about year and a half or so, started with this little tiny presentation that I did for my admin team. And it's really kind of grown and helped me see, I do have things to say. And so much of my writing now, I'm kind of focusing on that angle and trying to support the introverts, both who are teachers as well as who are students, and sharing information and doing that. I've been writing some blog posts along those lines. I also love my writer's notebook. And I still dash off. I love the little lines I hear that, in conversation, and I hold those and put those in my writer's notebook, or I play around with description and language, and I just love when I read something beautiful by a writer like Abigail Thomas, or who am I reading now? I'm reading Elizabeth Acevedo's new book. I love her character there. Like, I love looking at, how did she do that? Let me try that. So I still feel that connection to writers. I just love being around them. So.
That's amazing. So you will actually just copy the language of others into your notebook just so you can kind of immerse yourself in it.
I do, because I love language. I love those lines. And I love to take a poem that I love because the structure or something, and then write my own version of it. So I'll play around, when you take a line for a walk or something, open the same way that the poet does, but then change the rest of it, or find those 2 or 3 key lines and hold on to those, but write your own story around the poem. That's what I do for fun, Troy, and that's how we know we're introverted, right there, because that's a good Friday night for me.
Right. Well, I really like how you phrase that. I haven't heard that before. Take the line for a walk. I've heard it called copy change, or there's another writing project colleague, Bev Matulis, who called it dancing with an author.
Ooh, yeah.
But I've not heard take a line for a walk. So that's great. So as we bring our conversation to a close and think about all these elements of teaching writing and leading others in professional learning around the teaching of writing, what's next for you? Where are you at in your thinking, and where are you heading in your work with the Ed Collab or with CEL and NCTE or with your own teachers? What's on your horizon here this year?
So the other thing that we've been working on that I think is really important in the secondary level. So we've been implementing workshop at the secondary level for a few years, and I believe in workshop and wholeheartedly. With tweaks along the way as needed. But I think that we as high school educators don't make enough good use of strategy groups and small groups to help teach writers. I think that we've gotten really good with a writing conference and doing that individually, but that takes a lot of time to meet with 25 students in a 56-minute period. How long can you do that? So I've been encouraging and trying to support my teachers through some professional learning by asking them to see, okay, what do your students need? Why don't you pull this group of 4 and provide those students a mini lesson, and then they have their own kind of group of students who are all working on whatever the skill might be, integrating quotes or developing a scene or using descriptive language, whatever that focus skill is, because then they're getting teacher support as well as getting peer support from one another, because they're all kind of tasked with the same thing, so they can go back and be peer reviewers for one another. So that's one thing that we're working on as a department that I'm really, really excited about, because I do think it can help the efficiency, because time is always an issue, as well as help students feel supported in the process. So that's one of the things we're working on as a department. And for me, really interested in introversion and writing about it and thinking about it in the classroom, and continue to go out and collaborate with colleagues. Is that contradictory? Because I'm interested in introversion and collaborating with colleagues. But, on that topic, as well as, like, what are we doing? What are schools doing in order to meet the needs of those students? So.
Well, for what it's worth, if you ever want to collaborate with another introvert, the invitation is open.
Thank you, Troy. I'm going to take you up on that.
Well, thank you, Heather. I appreciate the work that you do with and for students, with and for other educators, both in your district and more broadly across our profession. And it's been a real pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you so much for having me, Troy. I enjoyed it.
Writing Matters with Dr. Troy Hicks is a writable podcast. Discover more episodes and subscribe on your favorite streaming platforms, or check out filmed episodes on YouTube. And if you want to learn how to grow great writers, check out writable.com.